morning. It's really weird to hear my voice on this microphone. Um, you like it? That's good. Also, other good news, my mom is not here yet, so unfortunately she'll miss this, but luckily it's being recorded, so that's good for her. So thanks for having me. I am really excited to be here. I attend Luther Church. I'm a member here. So I was very pleased when Pastor Karen mentioned that this event was happening and asked if someone could share a little bit about the solidarity economy, which is what I'm going to talk with you about. So they mentioned that I work at a nonprofit here in DC. It's called CFED, and we focus on issues, kind of resolving issues around inequality and around income and wealth in today's economy through a number of strategies, which I won't bore you with today. But it kind of comes full circle being here at Luther Place and talking about this work and kind of where I started. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about myself and then try to connect it back to what the solidarity economy means. So I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Go Heels! Any Tar Heel fans? And when I was there, I studied economics, and I kind of fell into that. I had no idea what I wanted to major in my second or third year, and I had taken a number of econ classes that I found really compelling. And I think, and by that time, by my junior year, I was also teaching Econ 101 to fellow students in recitations. And I was really struck by kind of the beauty of the way everything just works out in econ, right? Like if all your assumptions hold true, then the economy just moves. There's this invisible hand, as some might have heard, that moves economic engines and moves people and moves income and lifts all boats, right? That's how it works. But the big if, the like if and only if, is that this only works if a number of really important assumptions are true all the time, in every situation, for everyone. And so my kind of perfect model began to fall apart, which is really important because in econ, every model is just that. It's a model, and it's based on a series of assumptions. And so when I began to realize that, at one point it was kind of a crisis. I was like, oh my God, I spent 4 years studying this thing. And now it makes no sense to me whatsoever because I've kind of poked holes in these theories. But kind of over time, and I think you'll see in the vision or the ideas that I want to share today, I've realized that there are alternatives, and that's kind of the flip side of what I've learned. So to talk about a few of these assumptions that have to be real in order for all this to work. So like one big one is rationality, right? And it's rationality not in the sanity sense of rationality, it's rationality in the sense of economic decision making and the fact that all the actors in the system, if they're acting rationally, will do things that are generally in their best interest in terms of costs and benefits. Another important one is that people will always maximize the utility or the satisfaction that they get out of something. And I think most importantly that satisfaction always manifests in one way in the economy that we're dealing with today. But that's not really true, and that's another assumption that kind of fell flat when I started to think about how the world really works. And then another one is that people are operating with full information, or that there's kind of everyone is operating with the same understandings, same assumptions, same information about how the system works. And I also realized very quickly that that's not usually the case. So it started to these theories began to fall apart to me when I realized that I value things beyond money. As a student, I was also very interested in international development. I grew up predominantly overseas. My father's a Navy veteran, and so I had seen worlds beyond the world in the US where I was studying. And so as I would travel, and as a student, as I would work in other countries, it became really clear to me that there was, in many other cultures, values that were held higher than the value of money. And I also think in our own economy, in our own society, rather, that's also true. It isn't often reflected in our economic models. So I value things like people. I met really incredible people when I traveled, and I have in the US as well. I value things like equality and fairness, and social well-being of people, of obviously of myself and my family, but also for everyone else. I valued my health, which becomes more and more apparent as I watch my parents age and others around me experience health issues. And I also value time, which as a person who's been in the workforce for 5 years, I've very quickly learned it's hard to balance time and value my own time as much as I'd like to. And I also value justice, and I think there became a number of really obvious ways in which the economic system kind of is devoid of justice in a lot of really important ways. So what I realized was that our current system only accommodates one type of value, right? It only accommodates monetized value. And to me, there was so much more than that you can't just put a dollar amount on it and kind of measure utility and measure rational decision making around it. So what if we had different assumptions, right? And this is kind of the big idea that I want to share is what if we had an economy that was based on assumptions of value being inherent in things beyond those that can be monetized or valued in terms of dollars? And what if we had a different system entirely? So this is not a trash the whole system talk. I'm not a communist, in case anyone's wondering. But I do think that our system is inherently flawed, and I think that there's a lot of talk today around economic inequality, right? You think about the wealth gap between rich and poor. You think about the wealth gap particularly between families of color and white families in America. It's, depending on who you ask, between 13 and 20 times the wealth of black families is held by white families in America. And there are reasons for that. Our systems were built to create that. It's not an accident. It's not a tide that lifted some boats and not others. We built the ocean. We made the waves. And I think it's a really scary thing to kind of acknowledge and take ownership of that fact. But I think it's necessary to kind of think about if we want a world where more people can live in a way that is kind of values shared success instead of individual success. And I think it was great to follow the last act because I think she kind of set me up really well for this conversation. So, what if we didn't believe that the invisible hand would always work? What if we didn't believe that, or what if we didn't operate in an economic system where deregulation was the only way and privatization was the kind of ideal, opportune way to go in terms of government services? What if we valued social service expenditure more than we do military expenditure? What if we valued paying higher taxes because we knew it went to a higher social good? So those are kind of the fundamental questions that in terms of the solidarity economy movement are trying to disrupt the conversation around how our current economy works. So I'll share another kind of personal vignette here. So I moved to DC about 5 years ago when I graduated from undergrad and started working at CFED, where I still am. And like I mentioned, I'm a Navy brat, so I had never really participated in local government, right? So it's kind of ironic. I spent my entire life living on military bases and interacting with our government in a sense, but had really never been part of kind of civil society because you just don't have that on bases. You don't need it to some extent. So living in DC has been my first exposure to local politics, which here is particularly interesting. And also kind of local organizing, community organizing concepts and things like that. So coming to Luther Place was kind of a eye-opening moment for me. It happened after I went on a trip to Israel and Palestine. where I spent time with a number of young people who attend Luther Place, and a few of whom work here at the Steinbruck Center. So I became friends with them after that trip to Israel and Palestine, which is an entirely different TED Talk in itself. And I started coming to church with them. And so my high school pastor is here in the audience also, Pastor Craig, which is also almost as weird as having my mom in the front row. Um, and so coming to Luther Place was kind of a very different experience for me from most of my church experiences growing up. I walked in and saw people who looked like me, people who didn't look like me, people who live in the N Street Village building behind us, and people who might work in similar organizations as me, but there was kind of a very visible diversity when I came here. I was also just coming to hang out with my friends, right? I was coming to church because my friends were here, so it was a very different dynamic from going to church with my family as a kid. And so I'm saying all this to say I was drawn to Luther Place for a lot of reasons, partially because of the culture that attracted me, but also because of what I saw kind of turning around these alternative ways of thinking about how we interact with our community and how, in a bigger sense, how that shapes our economy. So some of the things I learned about there, and also things that have kind of been reinforced in my work at CFED, are the alternatives to kind of our current neoliberal economic system, right? So some disruptive ideas for you. What about cooperation? What if we kind of started building more economic models and more institutions of our economy that are focused on cooperation as opposed to individualism? Some of those might include credit unions, where the credit union is responsible to its members and its community more so than it is to a set of wealthy shareholders. Some others are participatory budgeting. So what if our cities, instead of kind of mandating a set of line items, included the community as they began to shape how they're going to spend their money? So what if the community actually decided how it received the benefits of the money that it puts into the system? What if we had more worker-owned co-ops where people who are employees of a business actually have a say in important business decisions that affect their lives and the success of the business? And what if we had different business models that, instead of having one bottom line of profit, which is kind of the standard today, actually value things like social benefit or environmental outcomes, and begin to change the kind of single bottom line into a triple bottom line, which is what you hear a lot about today. I don't have a time ticker, so I'm wondering if I'm over time. 5 minutes? Okay, cool. So some other values that I think are really important in these alternative models kind of fall around social justice and solidarity. So I mentioned that the system that we have today is kind of very intentionally created, very intentionally ingrained in our society and our policies. There's so many ways where you can look at policies from the New Deal on and before, I'm sure, that very intentionally institutionalized ways of treating different groups of people, and in doing so affect their economic outcomes today. And I think there's a lot that can easily be it's much harder to fix those things than it is to talk about fixing them, right? I went to a talk a couple weeks ago on MLK Day by Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote The Case for Reparations. And I've never been more jazzed up about reparations, but the bigger point, I think, is that there's no way we'll move past a lot of the racial inequities and social injustices we're dealing with today unless we deal with many of the underlying causes which were underwritten into redlining policies in the US in the 60s and beyond, and questionable lending practices, predatory lending, kind of all these intentionally created injustices that are often perceived as kind of injustices of the past or things that don't relate to economic opportunity, but in fact really do in a tangible way. So another idea to throw out in terms of solidarity economy ideas is kind of how do we, whether it's reparations or something else, how do we right many of the social injustices that play out in our economy in a way that makes sense for the future. So to close the story, I guess I'll say there's a lot of ideas around the solidarity economy, and they're very niche. I think there's not a lot of places where you're seeing entire economies shift to shift the balance toward a fair way of doing business. But I think as Lutherans, as people, as human beings, we kind of have an obligation to think about how we want to leave the world and how we want to live while we're in it. And I think by practicing a lot of these weird alternatives to the kind of status quo of our very individualistic, very rational, very assumption-based neoliberal economy, we can start to realize a different world. So as you leave today, think about what you can do in your own local economy. Think about what co-ops you can patronize. Think about what local ANC or other district meetings you can attend to inject these ideas, and challenge your friends to do the same. Thank you.